Meet Ichiro Yaso, an ex-pianist who found himself face to face with what seems to be a very lost German man in the middle of a Japanese convenience store. The thing is, this man claims to be none other than Ludwig van Beethoven. So, who is this man really, and what is he doing in Japan? These are the questions posed in the new music manga that was just released in Weekly Shonen Jump. This is the Star of Beethoven. And I am Crash, the guy who has the job of reviewing every single new Weekly Shonen Jump manga through their very first chapter, and that's a really good job to have. But occasionally I do come across some manga where I don't really have much to say, and this is one of them. I love music, and although I'm not really into classical music, music manga in general is something that I'm normally very interested in. It's a genre that's somewhat common, but not overly present, especially in Weekly Shonen Jump, and that's probably why there's a lot of people making immediate comparisons with the other music manga in Weekly Shonen Jump, P6. I find it really interesting how different manga chooses to tackle and portray music, because it's a medium that, by definition, it's pretty incompatible with a mute format, unless you're John Cage, at least. P6 is amazing in this, having each song have literal visual representations that range from beautiful landscapes to gigantic creatures. But Star of Beethoven seems to be going through a more realistic portrayal of music. But let's actually go into the actual chapter. Like I said before, this manga is the story of Ichiro Yasu, a high school kid who decides to skip the first day of school and instead walk to the convenience store where he works part-time and grabs some noodles. But his trip takes a sudden shift when an old man speaking German walks into the convenience store. He seems lost and potentially even under the effects of either drugs or alcohol, as he rambles about being the classic composer Beethoven himself. Luck would have it that our main character happened to be fluent in German, and so he takes the old man out of the store as they both go to eat something together at a restaurant. There, Yasu explains that Beethoven died over 200 years ago, which surprises the old man, but, you know, having in mind all the technology around him, he accepts it pretty easily. But the thing that really stays with him is the fact that even though a lot of other things of his time seemingly have gone forgotten, his name wasn't. Though honestly, the things that he named aren't really forgotten at all. Sure, the Carl and Johann names, maybe, but after a quick search, I found them to be his nephew and father respectively, which, isn't it weird that he said Johann and not, you know, father instead? Anyways, it seems like Beethoven got time traveled into the future moments before his death, and this time with his hearing intact, as you may have guessed, because, you know, they're having a whole conversation together. While there is much to find and learn with a time skip like this, Beethoven's desire first and foremost is to check the piano of the future, which, if it was me, I would automatically show him like a synth keyboard, though apparently that's not really a piano. So Yasu shows him a normal piano and claims that the instrument hasn't really changed in over 200 years either, which is not true actually. The pianos that we know today actually appeared in the late 19th century, which means that their popular use is just a tad younger than Beethoven's death. And he noticed this, of course, in what is, in my personal opinion, the most beautiful scene of this entire chapter. There's something about him finding something that is to us old and archaic and finding in it a pure evolution of what he knows. It shows that we take a lot for granted that humanity didn't always have. This is also the perfect showcase of how much Morihiro Ayashi, the author, actually researched Beethoven's life and time period. The scene even includes a letter that Beethoven himself wrote about the emergence of these new pianos. But this is where the story shifts back into Yasu as he meets two of his old classmates, Big Boob, Small Head Girl, and Covid. Small Head Girl, aka Kyohin, forces our character to play Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 on the piano, but Yasu has refused to play since losing a major competition 2 years before, and he fears that the lack of practice has rusted his play. Beethoven sits by his side and explains the meaning behind Symphony No. 5, a composition written while he was losing his hearing, a composition whose introduction signifies fate itself knocking on the door, our own fragilities and mortality coming after us, and yet we play. And so they both play the song together magnificently, and after the spectacle, Yasuo is left to wonder the actual question: is this man really Beethoven? All the while, the man makes the decision that the chapter ends on, to make Yasuo his disciple. So this is another one to talk about because while I don't think the manga did anything bad per se, the manga isn't really particularly amazing or anything either. It has one or two good moments that allow me to somehow be invested into the manga going forward, but honestly, the thing that makes me more invested into checking out at least chapter 2 is how it almost accidentally broke the expectations that I had about the manga going in. And I think a lot of other people expected Star of Beethoven to be another one in a grand line of shonen manga about teens being possessed by ghosts of the past, you know, Yu-Gi-Oh!, Ikara no Go, Tenmaku Cinema. I fully expected Beethoven to use the body of Yasu to just play the piano amazingly. I remember Melons on Twitter actually talking about the idea of having kids being possessed by ghosts of various composers and having these piano battles, which honestly sounds pretty rad. And while that would definitely be a more shonen-esque manga, and honestly I think it probably would have better chances of survival than what we got, I can't help but be more invested in this version of the story. I like the idea of Beethoven just popping out of nowhere in the future speaking German in the middle of Japan, and everyone around him just wondering what the hell this old man is doing. I think it would allow for a much more interesting and unique role in the story than something like Tenmaku, for example. I think the final thing we can and should talk about is the presentation of music. I mentioned it at the start of the video, but how music is represented in your music manga is very important. You can't really portray sound, so you just have to portray emotion. I think this is the one spot where comparing it to P6 is actually interesting, because while P6 had these really complex and beautiful visuals, Star of Beethoven is a lot more drawn back and much more aggressive. When Yasuo and Beethoven are playing the piano, they are portrayed less like human beings and more like possessed demons hitting the piano as hard as they can, as if their life depended on it, and I love that. If you actually go back and listen to the song that they are playing, it too feels aggressive, especially at the start. And I think the manga lets us not only into the passion that these characters have towards the piano, but also the pain and effort that comes from dedicating your entire lives to that passion. It's definitely rough. I think the art just in general is rough. And while it fails in a lot of places, I think where it counted, it did pretty well, and the mangaka can only improve from here, like Mapolo-san did in the early stages of P6. That said, I'm not sure it's gonna have that opportunity to shine and improve. I don't think it will survive for very long. Again, I just don't think it has a lot going on for it right now, and you need a really striking first chapter, and this is just not it. There's just not a lot to get invested into the cast and their stories right now other than Beethoven himself. And there's not really clear direction set in this first chapter to actually know what the manga is actually going for and really wants to do, so hopefully that will change and become more apparent and become better in the next following chapters, but we'll have to wait and see. But if you want to know my first thoughts on all of the other Weekly Shonen Jump series, then you can click the playlist on the left, and if you want to see my first thoughts on all the upcoming Weekly Shonen Jump manga, then you can subscribe. And if you watch until here, thank you very much, and I'll see you next video.